In 2016, Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska with a population of about 300,000, faced a series of violent crimes that were later linked to a single serial killer. The city, which already had a relatively high crime rate compared to other U.S. cities, was thrown into a state of fear by a series of seemingly random murders. Anchorage, like many other cities in America, has been plagued by the opioid crisis, which has led to an increase in gang activity and drug-related crime. However, a series of murders that began in the summer of 2016 appeared to be unrelated to these common problems, but instead the result of a single criminal acting without an obvious motive. The series of murders began on July 3, 2016. At 7:40 a.m., a woman riding a bicycle called 911 to report the discovery of two bodies on the grass near the Ship Creek Trail. The victims were 20-year-old Brianna Foisey and 41-year-old Jason Netter. Brianna Foisey was born in 1996 into difficult family circumstances. At the age of 5, she was taken in by a foster family. Brianna was diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, attachment disorder, and learning disabilities. Despite these problems, she was known as an energetic and outgoing girl who loved music, especially Broadway shows, and had a talent for singing. However, her developmental issues led her to make questionable friendships in her teens and eventually fall into a problematic cycle that led to substance abuse. Jason Netter was also homeless. He was known for his kindness, sense of humor, sociability, and willingness to help others. Jason had a deep love of nature and animals. Like Brianna, he struggled with substance abuse, which led to numerous legal problems. His unemployment made life difficult, making him unable to provide child support for his two daughters. Despite their age difference, Jason and Brianna became close friends. Netter, who had been homeless for a long time, became a protector for young Brianna, trying to protect her from various dangers. The police who arrived at the crime scene found that both victims had died of gunshot wounds to the chest and head. The absence of bullet casings at the crime scene led investigators to conclude that the killer had probably used a revolver. One bullet was found near the bodies, indicating that the shooter had missed with a single shot. Further analysis revealed that the weapon was a Colt Python 357 revolver, known for its trigger sensitivity and accuracy. The witness who reported the bodies told detectives about the strange encounter. During a morning bike ride across the bridge, a stranger calmly informed her of the presence of two dead people on the trail below, warning her to be careful before continuing on her way. This information led her to discover the bodies and subsequently call the emergency services. The behavior of the unidentified man aroused the detective's suspicions. His refusal to report the bodies himself, his lack of urgency or stress over the discovery, and his calm demeanor, as if he were warning of a minor inconvenience rather than a deadly tragedy, attracted the attention of the police. However, the witness was unable to provide a detailed description of the man, focusing more on the horrific scene in front of her than on the person who sent her there. Investigators reviewed video footage from surveillance cameras in a nearby industrial area. One of the recordings showed a man walking along a path shortly before the bodies were reported. However, his face was not visible as he was moving away from the camera. The video provided only a general idea of his appearance: blue pants or jeans, possibly a hoodie or hat, a jacket, and a backpack. The only more or less noticeable feature was his height. Less than a month after the tragic discovery of the bodies of Jason Netter and Brianna Foisey, a new incident occurred. On the morning of July 29, 2016, 21-year-old Trayvon Kendall Thompson, who was known to his family as Trey, was the victim of a seemingly similar act of violence. Trey was known for his intelligence, kindness, and willingness to help those in need, often bringing homeless people to his home for meals. On that fateful morning, he was biking to his Aunt S' house in East Anchorage to feed her dog in her absence. Tragically, he was almost at his destination when he was fatally shot by an unknown assailant. Officers responding to the scene found Trey S' body in the street with gunshot wounds to the head and torso. As in the previous case, no shell casings were found at the scene. A key element in this case was a surveillance camera that had a direct view of the place where Trey met his death. This camera, located on Trey S' Aunt S' property, captured the gruesome scene just a few meters from her door. Ironically, just a few weeks ago, Trey had repaired this same surveillance system that now captured his own fatal encounter. The video footage showed a man walking calmly down the street, suddenly raising his hand, pulling out a gun, and shooting Travion Kendall Thompson directly in the face. After Trey fell down, the attacker calmly walked over, put the gun in his pocket, took Trey's bike, and rode away. This incident had witnesses. Two teenage girls who had stayed up late were telling each other scary stories at the window of a neighboring house. At first, they were worried when they noticed a tall figure standing near a fire hydrant, which seemed out of place in the middle of the night. Then their attention was drawn to another figure down the street, Trey, just before the fatal shots were fired. After a brief distraction, they looked again and saw the tragic consequences. Trey was lying motionless on the ground, and the attacker was slowly fleeing on a bicycle, passing by their vantage point. These observant teenagers provided detectives with a detailed description of the shooter, an older man with wavy shoulder-length hair, wearing heavy boots, a cap and camouflage jacket, and particularly notable for his height. Careful analysis of the video footage allowed experts to estimate the shooter's height to be around 6 feet 2 inches, or even taller. Based on detailed descriptions from teenage witnesses, a composite sketch of the suspect was created and subsequently released to the public along with a photo of Thompson's stolen bicycle. Police urged the community to be vigilant and cautious. The link between Trey's murder and the previous Ship Creek trail killings was quickly established by investigators, further deepening the mystery as Trey, like Brianna and Jason, had no apparent enemies or known reasons to be targeted, suggesting the eerie possibility of random acts of violence. Forensic evidence conclusively linked the murders through the use of the same weapon, confirming the presence of a serial offender in Anchorage. Exactly 1 month after Trey's tragic death, Anchorage police received reports of another pair of murders in the same area. On the night of August 28, 2016, a woman walking through Moon Valley Park called 911 after discovering the body of a young man, later identified as 34-year-old Kevin Turner. Like Brianna and Jason, Kevin was homeless. Tragically, this young man was struggling with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. He searched for a facility that specialized in mental health, but was unable to find one that met his needs. Now, his life was over. Kevin was found sitting on a picnic bench in a park, his head resting on the table, holding socks in his hands. His shoes were off and standing nearby, indicating that he may have been attacked while trying to put on his socks. He did not seem to notice his attacker, as there was no sign that he tried to defend himself from the shots. Authorities also found a second victim in the park, later identified as 25-year-old Bryant DeHassan, a local environmentalist. He was on a nighttime bike ride and was found not far from where Kevin Turner lay. Although there was no direct connection between the two, no bullet casings were found at the crime scene, as in previous cases. The bullets that took the lives of Bryant and Kevin were fired from the same weapon, a 6-shot Colt Python 357 revolver. Detectives quickly concluded that the same gunman was behind the attacks, bringing the total number of his victims to 5. After the third incident, Anchorage police issued a warning to residents about the presence of a serial offender on the loose, urging them to be cautious and avoid public parks and bike paths, especially at night. The attacker showed no specific preference or targeting of a particular demographic, making potentially anyone the next victim. The community was gripped by fear after the warning. Along with the warning, authorities announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the perpetrator. Despite numerous clues and leads, progress in the investigation has come to a standstill. About 200 people gathered at Valley of the Moon Park, feeling the weight of recent events. People expressed concerns about the safety of the city. The mayor of Anchorage and the police chief met with the community following demands from the area for increased security. The mayor stated that community policing was working, but that the police department, with 386 sworn officers, was too small. According to professional standards, there should ideally be about 450 officers. The police chief emphasized the importance of the community's help in the investigation. He urged people to report any suspicious incidents, even if they seem insignificant, as this information could be vital to solving the case. James Dale Ritchie was born on November 4, 1976, in Anchorage, Alaska. During his school years, he stood out not only for his height, but also for his exceptional intelligence. Ritchie excelled in sports, playing both football and basketball, showing the potential for a professional sports career, as did two of his teammates. His talent caught the attention of the West Virginia University football team, leading to his recruitment after graduation in 1994. However, Ritchie's life path deviated significantly from what his peers expected. He enrolled at the university for one semester before dropping out to pursue a completely different path. Upon returning to Anchorage, Ritchie's life began to decline. He became addicted to illegal drugs, engaged in theft, drug trafficking, and organizing dogfights. Ritchie was arrested several times, and in 2005 he was convicted of burglary and attempted burglary with cable ties and 2 guns. After serving a 2-year sentence, James returned to Anchorage, where he is believed to have obtained his Colt Python revolver. In 2013, Ritchie moved to his parents' home in the small town of Broadway, Virginia. Even his mother expressed fear of him, describing him as a potential danger. She was convinced that her son's fate was either life in prison or a violent death. Despite these ominous predictions, Ritchie seemed to be looking for a change. He began preparing for an associate's degree at a local college and attended classes. James was reportedly friendly with his neighbors, making friends and even experiencing love. Nevertheless, Ritchie's later choices led him to a grim series of violent crimes, culminating in his death during a confrontation with law enforcement. Ritchie seemed to be rebuilding his life, but this phase was short-lived. His romantic relationship ended in a way that was far from what he had hoped for, causing deep stress for both individuals involved. Struggling with his feelings, Ritchie returned to Anchorage in March 2016. He even sought mental health support and took antidepressants for a while. Law enforcement was unable to confirm whether Ritchie had been officially diagnosed with any psychiatric condition, but there are indications that he may have indeed suffered from schizophrenia. After his death, a former roommate said that James Dale Ritchie often made strange claims, such as that he had the power to change weather patterns, truly believing he could make it rain or shine. He also had beliefs about his ability to dictate life and death, choosing who would survive and who would die. The situation changed dramatically in November 2016, when a completely separate incident accidentally led investigators to the suspect. The way in which this breakthrough occurred was startling. In the early hours of November 12, 2016, around 4:30 a.m., Anchorage Police Department officer Arne Salau was patrolling downtown when he received a report of a crime in the area. A taxi driver reported a passenger who had evaded paying the fare and fled from his car. While near the scene, Salau decided to search the neighborhood for the fugitive. On the almost empty streets at dawn, he noticed a man walking along the sidewalk. Salau intended to ask if the man had noticed any unusual activity and called out to him from his car, demanding that he stop. However, the individual ignored Salau's command and continued on his way, which was recorded by the patrol car's dashcam. Despite repeated orders, the man did not stop. Salau then intensified his efforts, using the car's loudspeaker to issue a command. Eventually, the man turned and walked in the direction of Salau's car, but instead of talking, he suddenly attacked, pulling a gun from his clothing and opening fire on the officer. Salau got out of his car and engaged the officer, returning fire. Sergeant Mark Patsky, who was nearby, intervened to help his colleague, also shooting at the attacker. Officer Salau was shot 4 times, suffering significant bone, liver, and intestinal injuries from the shooting. Despite his critical injuries, Salau survived. He was quickly taken to the hospital where he underwent a critical 7-hour surgery. The attacker had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head and was pronounced dead on the spot. It was only after his death that detectives investigating a series of crimes in Anchorage in recent months were able to link the individual to the main suspect. They analyzed the video of the shootout from the police car's dashboard camera and compared it to footage from other cameras during previous events. The unidentified man fit the profile of a serial offender. He was wearing a cap with a visor and a camouflage jacket, was extremely tall, and fired using only one hand. In addition, there was another key piece of evidence. The weapon used by the attacker was confirmed to be a Colt Python .357 6-shot revolver, the same weapon linked to all 5 deadly incidents. The shooter was identified as James Dale Ritchie. After James Dale Ritchie's death, detectives still lacked concrete evidence to definitively link him to the crimes. The similarity of the physical description and the identical weapon used in all 5 cases provided strong grounds for suspicion. The challenge now was to gather additional evidence to provide new reassurance to the public. During a search of Ritchie's home, law enforcement found 18 shell casings hidden in his closet, which matched the number of bullets fired from the revolver in all 5 incidents. Ballistics analysis confirmed that the weapon belonging to Ritchie was responsible for the victims' deaths. This evidence was deemed sufficient to officially announce in April 2017 that James Dale Ritchie was the attacker responsible for the serial crimes that kept Anchorage in a shadow of terror for months. Unfortunately, this revelation was of little comfort to the victims' families, who would have preferred to see the perpetrator captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. The motives behind Ritchie's deadly actions against these 5 individuals remain unknown and are likely doomed to remain unsolved. An interesting detail that may or may not be relevant to the case is that in his youth, James was close to Trayvon Thompson's father, Bobby Thompson. This long-standing friendship continued, and at the time of his son Trey's murder, Bobby was in prison for illegal drug and firearms offenses. This element has sparked speculation as to whether Ritchie knew his target that fateful night, and whether the memory of his friend came to mind. The series of murders committed by James Dale Ritchie had a profound impact on the city of Anchorage. For several months in 2016, residents lived in an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, not knowing who the next victim might be. These events highlighted safety concerns in the city and sparked discussions about the need for more police officers and improved public safety. While Ritchie's identification and death brought some relief to the community, it also left many unanswered questions. Ritchie's motives remain unclear, and we may never know why he chose these particular victims. The connection between Ritchie and the father of one of the victims adds another layer of complexity to this already confusing case. The case of James Dale Ritchie has also drawn attention to broader issues facing Anchorage. The city's high crime rate, drug and homelessness problems were highlighted by this series of murders. Many of Ritchie's victims were homeless or had drug problems, highlighting the vulnerability of these populations. The FBI's investigation into Ritchie's possible involvement in other unsolved murders in various U.S. states adds another dimension to the story. It raises questions about how many more crimes Ritchie may have committed and whether there were other victims elsewhere. Ritchie's accidental discovery during a routine police check also raises the question of how many more victims there might have been had he not been stopped. This underscores the importance of vigilance and effective law enforcement in preventing and solving such crimes. Despite the tragic nature of these events, they also demonstrated the strength of the Anchorage community. Residents came together to support each other and work with law enforcement to improve safety in the city. The case of James Dale Ritchie remains a reminder of the unpredictability and complexity of human nature, and the continued need for vigilance and cooperation to keep communities safe. Although many questions remain unanswered, the resolution of this series of murders has brought some closure to the victims' families and the people of Anchorage, allowing the city to begin the process of healing and recovery.